I told myself it was the last time 17 times. 17 evenings of walking out of Diana's front door on Magnolia Boulevard in Seattle, key in hand, the night air cold off the sound, telling myself that tomorrow I would stop finding reasons to be there. Tomorrow I would stop accepting the dinner invitations my mom passed along without knowing what they meant. Tomorrow I would stop sitting in Diana's kitchen until 11 at night talking about things that had nothing to do with dinner and everything to do with the fact that I had been in love with my mother's best friend since I was old enough to understand what that meant and not say anything about it. 17 times I walked out that door. 17 times I drove home through Seattle with my hands tight on the wheel, telling myself this was done now. 18 times, I went back. Diana was 32 years old and the most genuinely alive person I had ever been in a room with. She laughed at things with her whole body. She argued about things she cared about without apology. She had been my mother's closest friend for 14 years, and she had watched me grow up and treated me like a person worth talking to since I was 19, and the way she looked at me across her kitchen table had changed somewhere in the past year into something that was not how you looked at your best friend's son. I noticed. I did not say anything. 17 times. Until the 18th.
The dinner invitations started the September my mother broke her hip. Nothing serious. Clean break, good prognosis, 6 weeks of recovery at home. But my mother was independent in the particular stubborn way of women who had raised children alone, and the 6 weeks were difficult for her, and Diana, who lived 8 minutes away on Magnolia Boulevard, stepped in the way she always had when my mother needed something. She started hosting dinner twice a week. My mother came the first 2 weeks before the mobility became an issue, and after that, she sent me as her representative with the particular logic of mothers who believe food solves most problems and their children should eat more of it. I was 28 years old. I had my own apartment in Capitol Hill. I had dinner with my mother's best friend on Tuesday and Friday evenings and told myself this was a perfectly normal arrangement. The first Tuesday, I sat at Diana's kitchen table and watched her cook, moving through her kitchen with the ease and confidence of someone completely at home in their own space. Olive skin warm in the kitchen light, chestnut hair loose around her shoulders, and understood with complete clarity that nothing about this arrangement was going to be simple. I had known Diana my entire adult life. I had not seen her like this before. Or I had been seeing her like this for a while and had been very successfully not looking directly at it until I was sitting alone in her kitchen while she cooked, and there was nothing else to look at. I stayed until 9. I drove home telling myself it was dinner. I went back Friday.
She was 32 years old and the most genuinely alive person I had encountered in a city full of people performing being alive. Seattle did that to people. The gray and the coffee and the mountains always there in the distance on clear days, spectacular and indifferent, and most people I knew had developed a kind of curated version of themselves that they maintained consistently across all social contexts. Interesting in the right places, passionate about the approved things, emotion kept to the appropriate temperature. Diana ran warm. She argued about books across the kitchen table with the same intensity she brought to everything, leaning forward, hands moving, completely in it, and then laughed at something I said with her whole body and refilled my wine without asking and moved back to the counter to check something on the stove and came back mid-sentence like the movement had been a brief physical parenthesis in a thought she had not finished. She asked about my work. I was in urban planning, designing the kind of public spaces that most people used without ever wondering who designed them, and she was genuinely interested in a way that people were not usually genuinely interested. She asked the follow-up question, and then the follow-up to the follow-up, and I found myself explaining things I had never explained to anyone, because nobody had ever asked far enough. I left at 10 that Friday. Drove home with the windows down despite the September cold off the sound. Thought about the follow-up to the follow-up. Went back Tuesday.
By October, the dinners had stopped being about dinner. We ate at 7, always. She cooked things that were better than they needed to be for a casual Tuesday arrangement. Not performing, just caring about the quality of things, which was entirely Diana. And we ate at the kitchen table, with the window overlooking the garden and the Seattle night outside, and talked while we ate. And then kept talking. And the plates were cleared, and the wine was poured, and the hours moved, and I stopped tracking them. And at some point, the kitchen was quiet and warm, and the rest of Seattle was doing its late-night things outside, and we were still at the table, and the conversation had gone somewhere I could not have predicted from where it had started. One Tuesday in October, she told me about her marriage. She had been divorced 3 years. She mentioned it plainly, the way she mentioned everything, without performance, without asking me to handle it carefully, and I listened, the way I had learned to listen to her, completely, without planning what I would say next. The marriage had been the right decision, at the right time, that had slowly become neither of those things. She said it clearly and without bitterness, and moved on to something else, and I sat across the table and thought about what it meant to be 32 and honest about what had not worked. At 11, I looked at the time. She looked at the time. Neither of us had noticed it getting to 11. I drove home, telling myself tomorrow I would decline the Friday invitation. I accepted the Friday invitation.
It happened on a Friday in November when she was reaching for something on the top shelf of the kitchen cabinet, and I was standing too close. And she stepped back without knowing I was there. She stepped back directly into me. I put my hands on her shoulders instinctively, steadying, quick, completely reflexive. And she turned around, and we were close, closer than the kitchen required. My hands still on her shoulders, her face turned up toward mine, those deep green eyes close and slightly startled, and then not startled at all. Something moved across her expression that settled into something else, something that looked like recognition. I took my hands back. She turned back to the cabinet and reached for what she had been reaching for and said something about dinner that was entirely about dinner. I moved to the other side of the kitchen and picked up my wine and looked out the window at the dark November garden and felt my heartbeat doing something that no amount of standing on the other side of the kitchen was going to solve. We ate dinner. The conversation was warm and easy and entirely normal on the surface. But she had turned around and looked at me with that expression, and I had seen it, and we both knew I had seen it, and neither of us said a word about it. I left at 10:30, told myself it was the last time. Went back Tuesday. I started noticing what she wore. Not in a way I could justify professionally. In the way you notice what someone wears when you have understood something about why they wear it and cannot unknow that. On Tuesdays, she cooked in whatever she had been wearing to her architecture firm downtown, a fitted blazer and dark trousers, her hair still up from the day, coming slightly loose by the time I arrived. She was beautiful like that. The end-of-day version, slightly loosened, the professional composure giving way to something more real. On Fridays, she changed before I came. I noticed this in November. Noticed that the Friday version of Diana was different from the Tuesday version. Her hair down, a different kind of clothing, something that was still entirely appropriate and entirely deliberate. A deep green dress that fell to mid-calf, a fitted burgundy top and dark jeans, a cream silk blouse that was softer than the work blazers. I did not say anything about it, but I noticed. And one Friday in December, she opened the door in a black fitted dress that stopped my thought mid-step, and she looked at me for a second, just a second, registering that I had stopped, and then stepped back to let me in. I went in. She went back to the kitchen. I stood in the hallway for a moment before following her and told myself I would not come back Friday. I was back Friday.
December brought the rain that Seattle kept in reserve for the month when everyone was already tired, and the wine started earlier on Fridays because Diana said November had been difficult and December was worse, and I said I understood, which I did, and did not. One Friday in December, the rain was loud on the kitchen window, and we were 2 glasses in before dinner was even on the table, and the conversation was somewhere completely different from where it had started, and she was looking at me across the kitchen with those green eyes that had been doing something since November, and I was looking back. And neither of us was pretending we were talking about the thing we were talking about. She said, "You keep coming back." I said, "You keep inviting me." She looked at her wine glass. "My mother thinks this is about dinner." "I know." she said. She did not look up. Diana. She looked up. And the rain was loud on the window, and the kitchen was warm, and the wine was open, and she looked at me across the table with everything she had been not showing me since September, and I looked back at her with everything I had been not saying, and the kitchen held all of it in its warm, ordinary light. "I know what this is," she said quietly. "So do I said. She looked at her glass again. "Your mother is my best friend," she said. "Not a conclusion, just a true thing placed on the table between us." "I know," I said. We sat with that for a long moment. Then she stood up and came around the table and stood in front of me, and I stood up and she put her hand flat against my chest and looked up at me with those green eyes that had been doing something since November, and I was looking back, and neither of us was pretending we were talking about the thing we were talking about. She said, "You keep coming back." I said, "You keep inviting me." She looked at her wine glass. "My mother thinks this is about dinner." "I know," she said. She did not look up. "Diana." She looked up, and the rain was loud on the window, and the kitchen was warm, and the wine was open, and she looked at me across the table with everything she had been not showing me since September, and I looked back at her with everything I had been not saying, and the kitchen held all of it in its warm, ordinary light. "I know what this is," she said quietly. "So do I said. She looked at her glass again. "Your mother is my best friend," she said. "Not a conclusion, just a true thing placed on the table between us." "I know," I said. We sat with that for a long moment. Then she stood up and came around the table and stood in front of me, and I stood up and she put her hand flat against my chest and looked up at me with those green eyes and said, "I have been telling myself this was nothing for 4 months." "It's not nothing," I said. "No," she said, "it is not nothing." And the rain came down on Magnolia Boulevard, and the wine was open, and she was standing in front of me with her hand on my chest, and everything my mother did not know sat in the warm kitchen air around us, and I put my hand against her jaw, and she closed her eyes, and I kissed her in the December rain with the kitchen warm and the night outside, and 17 times of telling myself it was the last time, finally done. I did not leave at 11 that night. I stayed until 2 in the morning, and we sat on her living room couch with the rain still going and the wine finished and talked about everything we had not been talking about for 4 months, what this was, what it meant, what it cost. She was clear about the cost. Diana was always clear. My mother, 14 years of friendship, the particular weight of something that had been true and reliable for 14 years suddenly becoming more complicated. The dinners and the phone calls and the easy presence of a friendship that had survived everything. Diana's divorce, my parents' divorce, every ordinary and extraordinary thing that 14 years contained. She put all of it on the table honestly, and I listened to all of it honestly. And we sat in the living room with the rain outside and the weight of it genuinely between us, and neither of us pretended it was small. "I can't be a secret," she said. "I'm not asking you to be," I said. She looked at me. "I don't know how this works," she said. "Neither do I said. "But I know that 17 times of telling myself it was the last time means something." She was quiet for a moment. 17, she said. 17, I said. She looked at me with those green eyes that were doing something warm and complicated. "I counted too," she said quietly. I took her hand. She held on. And we sat in the Seattle night with the rain on the windows and everything uncertain and everything real. And I understood sitting there that the 18th time was different from all the others, because this time I was not going to leave telling myself anything except the truth. I told my mother in January. Not immediately, not the morning after. I needed time to understand what I was telling her before I could tell her, and Diana needed the same. And we agreed.
Quietly, honestly, the way we did everything. The January was soon enough. My mother was 61 years old and had known Diana since they were both in their late 20s, and what they had built in those 14 years was the kind of friendship that becomes part of the structure of a life. The Tuesday phone calls, the emergency contact, the person who came when things were difficult without being asked. I sat at my mother's kitchen table, the same kitchen table I had grown up at, smaller than Diana's, warmer somehow, and told her. She was quiet for a long time, not angry. My mother did not do anger as a first response. She did quiet, and then honest, and then whatever came after honest. "How long?" she said. "September," I said. She looked at her coffee. "You told her about the dinners," I said. It was not a question. "She told me you needed feeding," my mother said. A pause. "Diana always said that about you, since you were 19, that you needed someone to make sure you ate properly." I sat with that. "Mom, I need time," she said. Not angry, just true. "I need some time with this." I said, "Of course." She looked at me across the kitchen table with the expression mothers have when they are deciding something about their children and have not finished deciding yet. "Is she happy?" she said finally. "Yes," I said. She nodded once, looked at her coffee. "Then give me time," she said. January in Seattle is the month that tests whether you actually want to be somewhere or whether you have just been tolerating it. The gray settles in completely. The mountains disappear behind it. The rain becomes less event and more condition, a permanent state of affairs that the city simply operates within. Most people who do not love Seattle leave in January. The ones who stay have made their peace with it. I had made my peace with Seattle years ago, and in January, I made my peace with something else. Diana and I built the ordinary things that January, the things that look small from the outside and are the actual substance of something real. Learning which coffee she wanted without asking, her learning that I needed quiet in the mornings and conversation in the evenings, the particular rhythm of two people discovering each other's habits. Tuesday evenings that were still at her kitchen table, because the kitchen table was where we had always been honest, and we saw no reason to change that. My mother called Diana in the third week of January. Diana told me about it that Friday. Quietly, honestly, the way she told me everything. The call had been 40 minutes. Not easy, not resolved into perfect acceptance by the end of it, but honest, which was what both of them were when it mattered, and honest was the beginning of something working. I sat at the kitchen table and listened, and felt the particular weight of love that cost something. Not the easy kind, not the uncomplicated kind, but the real kind that requires something from everyone it touches and is worth the requirement, worth every last bit of it. February arrived, and Seattle opened briefly. 3 days of February sun that the city always produced like a reminder of what was possible. And I drove to Diana's on a Saturday morning, and we walked the trail along the Sound with the mountains visible for the first time in weeks, and the city below us clean and bright in the February light. She walked beside me with her chestnut hair loose in the wind off the water, and her green eyes bright in the winter sun, and her hand in mine, and I thought about September, about the first Tuesday, about the kitchen and the wine,
and the 17 times of telling myself it was the last time. 18 times. I went back 18 times. And what I found on the 18th time was everything the first 17 had been building toward. Real, honest, complicated in all the ways that things worth having are complicated, and clear in the way that things are clear when they are true. My mother came to dinner in February. Diana cooked. I set the table. The three of us sat in the kitchen that had been the beginning of all of this and ate and talked, and it was not easy and not perfectly resolved and entirely real. Afterward, my mother and I stood in the hallway putting our coats on, and she looked at me for a moment with the expression she had been working on since January. "She makes you different," my mother said quietly. "Better different." I looked at her. "I know," I said. She nodded, picked up her bag. "Don't be late next time," she said, and walked out. I stood in Diana's hallway and heard the kitchen behind me and thought about all 17 times I had walked out that door telling myself it was the last time, and understood finally, completely, without anything left to pretend, that I had never meant it once.